I still remember the exact moment my career at Corel Technologies imploded. Not because of poor performance, not because of budget cuts, but because of a $400 expense report that I had every right to submit. My name is Esme Parker, and I used to be the senior data architect at one of the fastest-growing tech companies in Seattle. Used to be. Past tense. Because apparently, integrity and following company policy meant nothing when it conflicted with office politics. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I walked into the sleek glass building that housed Corel Technologies. The company specialized in artificial intelligence solutions for healthcare systems, and I'd poured 3 years of my life into building their core data infrastructure. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family gatherings, and relationships that withered because I was always just finishing one more thing. I had just returned from a client meeting in Portland where I'd successfully pitched our new predictive analytics platform to a major hospital network. The deal was worth approximately $8 million, and I'd been the lead technical consultant on the presentation. My manager, Wyatt Cooper, the CTO, had specifically asked me to take the client team out for dinner after the presentation to seal the relationship. "Spare no expense, Esme," he told me over the phone. "These people are going to be huge for us. Make sure they feel valued." So I did exactly that. I took the 3-person procurement team to a respected steakhouse, ordered a nice bottle of wine, and spent 4 hours building rapport and answering their technical questions. The bill came to $400, which I charged to my corporate credit card as instructed. When I submitted my expense report the following week, I thought nothing of it. It was a standard business expense, pre-approved by my direct supervisor, and well within the company guidelines for client entertainment. 2 days later, I was called into Wyatt's office. Wyatt was one of those executives who'd climbed the ladder more through networking than technical expertise. He had a degree in business administration, not computer science, and often relied on his team to explain the actual technology we were building. But he was charismatic, well-connected, and knew how to talk to investors. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. "Esme, we need to discuss your recent expense report," he said, not even looking up from his laptop as I entered. I sat down confused. "The Portland dinner? You approved that in advance." "I approved a reasonable dinner. $400 for 3 people seems excessive." My stomach tightened. "Wyatt, you told me to spare no expense. That's a standard client dinner at a business-appropriate restaurant. I have the itemized receipt." He finally looked at me, his expression cold. "Corel is tightening budgets. We can't have employees throwing money around carelessly." Carelessly? This was a strategic dinner for an $8 million deal that I just closed for us. "A deal you closed as part of your job responsibilities," he countered. "You don't get bonus points for doing what you're paid to do." I felt heat rising in my chest. "Are you seriously criticizing me for following your direct instructions?" "I'm criticizing your judgment. A good employee would have found a more cost-effective option." This was absurd, and we both knew it. $400 was nothing in the context of enterprise sales. I'd seen Wyatt himself expense $1,000 dinners without anyone batting an eye. "Is this really about the money?" I asked carefully. His jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I knew exactly what it meant, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been asked to review some of Wyatt's technical specifications for a proposal he was putting together. The documents were riddled with errors, basic misunderstandings of our system architecture that would have been embarrassing if presented to a client. I'd pointed out the mistakes privately and professionally, even offering to help him revise the materials. He'd smiled and thanked me, but something in his eyes had gone cold. Men like Wyatt didn't like being corrected, especially not by women who knew more than they did. "Nothing," I said, standing up. "I'll be more mindful of expenses in the future." "See that you are. Consider this a formal warning." A warning. For following his own instructions. I returned to my desk, my hands shaking with anger. Around me, the open plan office buzzed with the usual activity. Developers typed furiously at their keyboards, product managers huddled in glass-walled meeting rooms, and the espresso machine in the break room hissed constantly. My colleague Hannah rolled her chair over to my desk. She was a junior developer I'd been mentoring for the past year. "You okay? You look like you want to punch something." Just a fun conversation with Wyatt about expense reports, I muttered. Hannah grimaced. Let me guess. He's on one of his power trips again. Something like that. She lowered her voice. You know Derek from sales? He expensed a $2,000 dinner last month and nobody said a word. Of course he did. Derek was Wyatt's golfing buddy. Different rules applied. I tried to put the incident behind me and focus on my work. We had a major product launch coming up in 6 weeks, and the data pipeline I'd designed was critical to its success. I buried myself in code, architecture diagrams, and system optimization. But things got worse. 2 weeks after the expense report incident, I was excluded from a crucial planning meeting about the product launch. My calendar invite was mysteriously deleted, and I only found out about it when Hannah mentioned something about the decisions we made this morning. What decisions? I asked. In the architecture review meeting. The one about the data redundancy protocols. I wasn't in that meeting. Hannah's eyes widened. But you designed the entire data system. How could they have an architecture meeting without you? Good question. I immediately went to Wyatt's office, but his assistant informed me he was unavailable. I sent him an email asking why I'd been excluded from a meeting about my own project. His response came 3 hours later. We're streamlining our meeting structure. Not everyone needs to be in every discussion. Not everyone. Just me apparently. The exclusion continued. Over the next 2 weeks, I was systematically removed from decision-making processes I'd previously led. Junior developers were suddenly being asked to present my work in meetings I wasn't invited to. My project updates were no longer included in the weekly executive briefings. I watched as my 3 years of work was slowly being handed over to other people, primarily to a new hire named Henry who had joined the company 2 months earlier. Henry was competent enough, but he didn't understand the intricacies of the system architecture the way I did. He was also, notably, one of Wyatt's former colleagues from his previous company. The writing was on the wall, but I refused to believe it was happening. Then came the performance review. I'd had excellent reviews for my entire tenure at Corel. My last review 6 months prior had resulted in a promotion and a significant raise. I'd been told I was on track for a potential director-level position within the year. Wyatt scheduled my review for a Friday afternoon. I walked into the conference room expecting a routine conversation. Esme, I'll be direct, Wyatt said, sliding a document across the table. Your performance has been declining significantly over the past quarter. I stared at him. Declining? I just closed an $8 million deal and successfully launched the analytics platform ahead of schedule. Your technical work is adequate, but your teamwork and judgment have become concerning. You've demonstrated poor financial decision-making, difficulty collaborating with colleagues, and resistance to feedback. Every word was a carefully constructed lie. I looked down at the performance review document. It was filled with vague criticisms and unsubstantiated claims. Fails to align with team objectives. Shows limited growth potential. Demonstrates concerning judgment in resource allocation. This is fiction, I said flatly. None of this is accurate and you know it. I have documentation from multiple sources supporting these assessments. What sources? Show me the feedback. Personnel matters are confidential. You'll need to trust the process. Trust the process. The same process that had systematically marginalized me for the past month because I dared to correct his technical errors and then followed his own instructions. I want to escalate this to HR, I said. That's your right, Wyatt replied smoothly. But I should warn you that filing frivolous complaints won't help your situation. The threat was barely veiled. Speak up and things will get worse. I went to HR anyway. The HR director, a woman named Claudia, listened to my concerns with a sympathetic expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took notes, nodded in appropriate places, and assured me she would look into the matter. 3 days later she called me back into her office. Esme, I've reviewed your concerns with Wyatt and other members of the leadership team. While I understand you're frustrated with your performance review, I don't see evidence of any policy violations or unfair treatment. He gave me a warning for following his explicit instructions about a client dinner. He's excluding me from meetings about my own projects. How is that not unfair treatment? Claudia's expression remained neutral. Management has discretion in how they structure their teams and allocate resources. Regarding the expense report, Wyatt has clarified that his guidance was misunderstood. He expected you to use better judgment in interpreting his direction. That's not what happened, and we both know it. I understand you disagree, but without evidence of discrimination or policy violation, this falls under normal management discretion. My recommendation is to focus on addressing the performance concerns Wyatt has raised. I left her office understanding exactly what was happening. This was a managed exit. They were building a paper trail to justify firing me, and HR was complicit in the process. But why? What had I done that was so threatening? The answer came the following week when I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I was working late as usual, finishing up some database optimization. Most of the office had cleared out by 7 p.m., and I was alone in my section of the floor. Or so I thought. Voices carried from one of the conference rooms, the door slightly ajar. I recognized Wyatt's voice immediately, along with another man I identified as Jackson, the company's CFO. The Cromwell deal is going to be massive, Jackson was saying. But we need someone heading the technical side who can play ball with their leadership team. Henry's perfect for it, Wyatt replied. He's got the right background, the right connections. He and the Cromwell CTO went to Stanford together. What about Parker? She built the system they're buying. There was a pause. Esme's brilliant technically, but she's become difficult to work with. Challenges everything, doesn't respect the chain of command. Plus, Cromwell's leadership team is all old school guys. They'll respond better to Henry. My blood ran cold. So we're sidelining our best architect because the client might prefer talking to a man? Jackson sounded skeptical. I'm sidelining her because she's become a liability. That expense report incident showed poor judgment, and she's been pushing back on every decision I make. We need team players, not lone wolves who think they're smarter than everyone else. Just make sure we're covered legally. Last thing we need is a discrimination lawsuit. Already handled. HR has documentation of performance issues. If we need to let her go, we're in the clear. I stood frozen in the hallway, every word a dagger. They were planning to fire me. Not because of my performance. Not because of anything I'd actually done wrong. But because Wyatt's ego couldn't handle being corrected, and because a potential client would respond better to a man. The $400 expense report had never been about the money. It had been an excuse, a paper trail, a justification for what they'd already decided to do. I went back to my desk, my mind racing. I could fight this. I could hire a lawyer, file a formal complaint, make noise. But I knew how these things played out. Even if I won, I'd be branded as difficult and litigious. My career in Seattle's tech scene would be effectively over. Or I could leave quietly, take a severance package if they offered one, and try to rebuild somewhere else. Neither option felt like justice. I spent the weekend thinking, planning, and reviewing every file I had access to. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I would play their game, but I'd play it better than they ever expected. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained a perfect facade of compliance. I accepted Wyatt's feedback without argument. I volunteered to document all my projects in meticulous detail, ostensibly to help with knowledge transfer to other team members. I created comprehensive technical documentation, architecture diagrams, and system guides. What Wyatt didn't know was that I was documenting everything else too. Every email, every meeting note, every decision that had been made about the data infrastructure I'd built. I backed up my files to personal storage. I saved correspondence showing Wyatt's original approval of the Portland dinner expense. I recorded the timeline of my systematic exclusion from meetings and decision-making. I also did something else. Something that would prove crucial later. I requested access to the company's contract database, citing a need to understand client requirements better for the Cromwell project. As senior architect, I still had the clearance. I spent hours reviewing contracts, proposals, and financial projections. What I discovered made my blood boil. The Cromwell deal that Wyatt and Jackson had discussed wasn't just big. It was enormous. A 5-year contract worth $15 million. And it was entirely dependent on the data infrastructure I had designed. The proposal they were preparing explicitly referenced my architecture, my algorithms, and my innovation in predictive analytics. Henry, the golden boy they were positioning to replace me, had contributed virtually nothing to the technical foundation of what they were selling. He'd been with the company for less than 3 months. But that wasn't the most interesting part. As I dug deeper into the contract terms, I noticed something unusual. The proposal specified that the lead architect of the system would be available for ongoing consultation and system evolution throughout the contract term. It was a standard clause in enterprise software deals, ensuring continuity and technical support. The contract explicitly named me as the lead architect. This meant one of two things would happen. Either they'd have to disclose to Cromwell that the person who built their system was no longer with the company, potentially jeopardizing the deal, or they'd have to keep me on despite Wyatt's plans. I smiled grimly. They'd painted themselves into a corner. But I wasn't done yet. I reached out to a former colleague, Adrian, who had left Corel 6 months earlier to start his own consulting firm. We met for coffee at a place far from the office. "Esme, you look stressed," he said as I sat down. "That's an understatement." I told him everything. The expense report, the performance review, the overheard conversation, the systematic marginalization. Adrian listened carefully, his expression growing darker. "That's blatant retaliation. You could sue them into the ground." "Maybe. But I have a better idea." I laid out my plan. Adrian's consulting firm specialized in data architecture and AI implementation, exactly the kind of work I did for Corel. He was actively seeking to expand but lacked the technical expertise to compete for major contracts. "What if I joined your firm?" I proposed. "Not as an employee. As a partner. I bring my expertise, my reputation, and potentially some very interesting information about market opportunities." His eyes lit up. "You're serious?" "Completely. But I need to time this carefully. I can't violate my non-compete or steal clients. But I can position us to compete for future opportunities, and I can make sure my current employer understands the value of what they're throwing away." Over the next several days, Adrian and I worked out the terms of partnership in his firm, soon to be renamed Atlas Dynamics. I would come on board as Chief Technology Officer with a significant equity stake. We would focus on the same healthcare AI market that Corel dominated, but we'd differentiate through superior technical implementation and client service. The timing would be everything. Meanwhile, at Corel, the situation continued to deteriorate. Wyatt was now openly hostile, criticizing my work in team meetings and second-guessing every decision I made. It was clear he was building toward a termination. The breaking point came 3 weeks after I'd overheard the conversation about the Cromwell deal. Wyatt called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. HR Director Claudia was already there, along with a man I didn't recognize who was introduced as outside legal counsel. This was it. The termination meeting. "Esme, thank you for coming in," Wyatt began with false courtesy. "We've decided that your role at Corel is no longer a good fit for the direction we're heading." I said nothing, just listened. "Effective immediately, we're terminating your employment. You'll receive 2 weeks of severance pay and we'll provide a neutral reference for future employers." 2 weeks. For 3 years of 60-hour weeks and transformative work. Claudia slid a document across the table. "This is a separation agreement. It includes the severance terms and a standard non-disparagement clause. We'll need you to sign before you leave today." I picked up the document and read through it carefully. The non-disparagement clause was particularly aggressive, essentially preventing me from ever speaking about the circumstances of my departure or anything negative about the company. "I'd like to have my attorney review this before signing," I said calmly. Wyatt's expression tightened. "That's unnecessary. This is a standard separation agreement." "I'm sure it is. But I'm not signing anything without legal review." The outside counsel spoke up for the first time. "Ms. Parker, refusal to sign will result in forfeiture of the severance package." "That's my decision to make," I replied, standing up. "Unless there's anything else, I'll begin packing my belongings." An hour later, I walked out of Corel Technologies for the last time, carrying a box of personal items and a thumb drive containing every piece of documentation I'd carefully collected. I did not sign their agreement. The next morning, I signed partnership papers with Adrian at Atlas Dynamics. I was officially a CTO again, but this time at a company where my expertise was valued. "What's our first move?" Adrian asked as we clinked coffee mugs in celebration. "We wait," I said. "And we watch." I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks after my termination, I received a LinkedIn message from someone named Nolan Grant, identifying himself as the CTO of Cromwell Health Systems. Ms. Parker, I hope this message finds you well. I understand you recently departed from Corel Technologies. I wanted to reach out personally as we're in final negotiations for a significant contract with them, and your name appears throughout the technical documentation as the lead architect. Would you be available for a brief call? I smiled. The dominoes were starting to fall. I scheduled a call with Nolan for the following day. During that conversation, I was carefully professional, avoiding any negative comments about Corel or Wyatt. I simply answered his technical questions about the architecture and confirmed that yes, I had been the primary designer of the system they were considering. Are you still available for consultation? He asked directly. Unfortunately, I'm no longer with Corel Technologies. There was a long pause. That's concerning. The contract specifies your ongoing involvement. I understand. That's a conversation you'll need to have with Corel leadership. May I ask where you're working now? I'm Chief Technology Officer at Atlas Dynamics. We specialize in healthcare AI solutions. Another pause. Would Atlas Dynamics be interested in bidding on a project like ours? My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. We would certainly be interested in discussing your requirements. However, I should mention that I'm bound by a non-compete agreement with Corel. I'd need to review the specifics of any project to ensure we're in compliance. Understood. Let me do some internal discussion with our team and get back to you. I hung up and immediately called Adrian. The Cromwell CTO just reached out. They're concerned about the contract terms with Corel, and they asked if we'd be interested in bidding. Can we even do that legally? Depends on how the project is structured. My non-compete prevents me from working on the exact same contracts I worked on at Corel. But if Cromwell decides to cancel that contract and open a new bidding process, that's their decision, not mine. Adrian laughed. You've thought this through. I've had plenty of time to think. Over the next week, I heard through industry connections that the Cromwell deal with Corel was in trouble. Nolan had apparently confronted Wyatt about the contractual terms regarding my involvement, and Wyatt had been forced to admit I was no longer with the company. Cromwell's legal team then noticed several other issues with the proposal, including overstated capabilities and unrealistic timelines. Things started to unravel quickly. Meanwhile, Atlas Dynamics received a formal RFP from Cromwell Health Systems for a data analytics platform. It was similar in scope to what Corel had proposed, but reframed as a new project with different specifications. Adrian and I worked around the clock to prepare a response. I was careful to design something that built on my general expertise without directly copying anything proprietary to Corel. It was a fine line to walk, but I stayed on the right side of it. Our proposal emphasized something that Corel never prioritized: genuine partnership and consultation. We outlined a collaborative approach where the client was involved in every stage of development, with ongoing support from the actual people who built the system. We submitted our bid with a price point of $12 million, lower than Corel's $15 million proposal but with more comprehensive support included. 2 weeks later, Nolan called me personally. Ms. Parker, I'm pleased to inform you that Cromwell has selected Atlas Dynamics for this project. Your technical expertise and approach to client partnership were deciding factors. I thanked him professionally, but inside I was soaring. We'd done it. Not only had we won a massive contract, but we'd taken it directly from the company that had fired me over a $400 expense report. But I wasn't finished. The same day we won the Cromwell contract, I received a call from a reporter at a major tech industry publication. She'd heard through sources that there was a story brewing about Corel Technologies losing a major deal after firing a key technical lead. Ms. Parker, would you be willing to speak on the record about your experience at Corel? This was delicate territory. I still hadn't signed their non-disparagement agreement, which meant I was legally free to speak. But I also knew that trashing a former employer publicly could damage my own reputation. I'm willing to discuss the situation, but only in terms of facts, not personal grievances, I said carefully. The resulting article, published 3 weeks later, was devastating for Corel. Titled "When Cost-Cutting Costs Millions: The Hidden Price of Management Short-Sightedness," it outlined how Corel had terminated their lead architect over a minor expense dispute, only to lose a $15 million contract because they could no longer fulfill the technical terms they'd promised. The article didn't need to editorialize. The facts spoke for themselves. What followed was a cascade of consequences I hadn't fully anticipated. 3 days after the article published, I received an email from Jackson, the CFO I'd overheard in that conference room conversation. He wanted to meet. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Jackson looked tired, older than I remembered from just 2 months earlier. Esme, I wanted to reach out personally, he began. What happened to you at Corel was wrong. I should have pushed back harder against Wyatt's treatment of you. Why didn't you? I asked bluntly. He sighed. Corporate politics. Wyatt had the CEO's ear and I didn't want to die on that hill. I told myself it wasn't my battle to fight. And now we've lost the Cromwell deal and we're facing serious questions from our board about management competence. The article made us look incompetent and vindictive. We're losing credibility in the market. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, though I wasn't particularly sorry. I'm not here to ask you to retract anything or make things easier for us, Jackson continued. I'm here because I want you to know that some of us recognized your value, even if we didn't have the courage to defend you properly. That's good to know, but it doesn't change anything. I understand. But I also wanted to give you a heads up. Wyatt is out. The board terminated him yesterday. They're bringing in new technical leadership and restructuring the entire management team. I absorbed this information silently. Wyatt, the man who'd systematically destroyed my career over a bruised ego, had been fired. The board has asked me to explore whether you'd be interested in returning to Corel in a senior leadership capacity, Jackson added. I almost laughed. You're joking. I'm completely serious. They recognize the mistake that was made and they want to make it right. Jackson, I'm a partner and CTO at Atlas Dynamics now. I have equity, autonomy, and the respect of my colleagues. Why would I give that up to return to a company that treated me like garbage? I told them you'd probably say that, he admitted. But I had to ask. We parted cordially, but I left that meeting with a clear understanding. My departure from Corel had triggered consequences far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Over the following months, Atlas Dynamics thrived. The Cromwell contract was just the beginning. Word spread in the healthcare technology community about our approach and expertise. We won 3 more significant contracts within 6 months, and our revenue grew exponentially. Meanwhile, Corel Technologies struggled. The loss of the Cromwell deal had been a major blow to their credibility, and several other clients started questioning whether the company could deliver on its technical promises without the team that had built their core systems. Their stock price declined by nearly 30% over the next quarter. Several key employees left, including Henry, the golden boy who was supposed to replace me. Turns out that having connections isn't the same as having competence. I won't pretend I didn't feel satisfaction watching their downfall, but I was also busy building something positive rather than dwelling on revenge. Atlas Dynamics hired more staff, including several former Corel employees who reached out to me after hearing about my story. Hannah, the junior developer I'd mentored, was one of them. I couldn't stay there after what they did to you, she told me during her interview. If that's how they treat their best people, what hope do the rest of us have? Within a year, Atlas Dynamics had become a serious competitor in the healthcare AI space, with annual revenue approaching $20 million. We were profitable, growing sustainably, and most importantly, we'd built a company culture based on respect and genuine technical excellence. I was invited to speak at a major technology conference about data architecture in healthcare. During the Q&A session, someone asked about my transition from Corel to Atlas Dynamics. I learned that your value isn't determined by how one company treats you, I said. It's determined by the quality of your work and your ability to create opportunity even in difficult circumstances. When a door slams in your face, sometimes the best response is to build your own building. The audience applauded, but the real reward wasn't the recognition. It was knowing that I'd transformed a setback into a launch pad. 18 months after my termination from Corel, I received one more unexpected communication. It was a formal letter from Corel's new CEO, a woman named Catherine who'd been brought in to turn the company around. The letter was a formal apology, acknowledging that my termination had been mishandled, and that the company had failed to live up to its stated values. It offered a financial settlement in recognition of the regrettable circumstances of my departure. The settlement amount was substantial, enough to make a real difference financially, though it couldn't undo the professional damage or personal stress I'd endured. I consulted with my attorney before responding. She advised me that accepting the settlement wouldn't prevent me from continuing to share my story, as the offer contained no non-disparagement clause. I accepted the settlement and donated half of it to an organization that supports women in technology who face workplace discrimination. The other half went into expanding Atlas Dynamics. Looking back now, I can see how that $400 expense report was both the worst and best thing that ever happened to my career. Worst because it revealed how petty, vindictive, and threatened some people become when you outshine them. It showed me that doing excellent work isn't always enough, and that office politics can destroy careers regardless of merit. But best because it forced me out of a situation where I would never have been truly valued. It pushed me to take risks I might not have otherwise taken. It led me to build something of my own, where I had control over my professional destiny. Wyatt Cooper probably thought he was punishing me when he terminated my employment. In his mind, he was eliminating a threat to his authority and clearing the path for his preferred employee. What he actually did was free me to become a competitor who understood his company's weaknesses intimately. He turned a loyal employee into a rival with nothing to lose and everything to prove. That $400 expense report he claimed showed poor judgment became the catalyst for a $15 million swing in the market. Corel losing the Cromwell contract while Atlas Dynamics won a $12 million deal, plus millions more in subsequent business. The cost of his ego was incalculable. I sometimes wonder if he ever made the connection, if he ever lay awake at night realizing that his pettiness had cost his company millions while launching a competitor that eventually surpassed them in technical reputation. Probably not. Men like Wyatt rarely learn those lessons. But I learned mine. I learned that your value isn't determined by how others treat you. I learned that setbacks can become opportunities if you're strategic and patient. I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's building something better. Most importantly, I learned that when someone tries to diminish you over something as trivial as a $400 expense report, they're revealing their own insecurity, not your inadequacy. Today, Atlas Dynamics employs 47 people. We've completed projects worth over $50 million in total. We've been recognized as one of the fastest-growing companies in our sector. And I wake up every morning knowing that I work with people who value expertise, integrity, and genuine collaboration. Hannah, my former mentee, is now a senior developer at Atlas. She recently presented at a conference, sharing some of the technical innovations we've developed. After her talk, she texted me, "Remember when you told me that good work eventually gets recognized? You were right." I smiled when I read that, though I'd add a caveat. Good work gets recognized when you're in an environment that values it. Sometimes you have to create that environment yourself. A few months ago, I ran into Claudia, the former HR director from Corel, at an industry networking event. She approached me hesitantly. "Esme, I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have fought harder for you. I knew what was happening wasn't right, but I prioritized keeping my job over doing the right thing." "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. For what it's worth, I left Corel about 6 months ago. I couldn't reconcile my values with what I was being asked to do there. We talked for a few minutes about her job search and the challenges of maintaining integrity in corporate environments. Before we parted, she asked, "Do you ever regret how things played out?" I thought about that carefully. I regret that it happened the way it did. I regret the stress, the unfairness, the waste of talent and potential. But do I regret where I ended up? Not for a second. And that's the truth. Atlas Dynamics isn't just a company. It's proof that the system doesn't always win. That sometimes when you're wronged, the best response is to build something so undeniably excellent that your former employer's decision becomes obviously foolish in retrospect. Wyatt Cooper fired me over $400, thinking he was eliminating a problem. Instead, he created a competitor that helped cost his company $15 million and built a thriving business in the process. That's not revenge. That's justice. And it's the best possible outcome I could have imagined when I walked out of Corel Technologies carrying that box of personal belongings, my professional reputation in tatters, wondering if my career was over. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The lesson I'd offer to anyone facing similar circumstances is this. When someone tries to break you over something petty, Don't waste energy fighting them on their terms. Instead, take everything you've learned, every skill you've developed, every connection you've made, and build something they can't touch. Success isn't the best revenge. Building something meaningful while they collapse under the weight of their own incompetence. That's the best revenge. And unlike the temporary satisfaction of watching someone get fired or humiliated, the satisfaction of building something excellent lasts forever. I still have the itemized receipt from that $400 dinner in Portland, framed in my office at Atlas Dynamics. It's a reminder that small acts of pettiness can have enormous consequences, and that the person who seems to have all the power in the moment doesn't always win in the end. Every time I look at it, I remember where I came from and how far I've traveled. And every time a new employee asks about it, I get to tell them the story of how our company began. Not with a business plan or venture capital, but with one person's refusal to accept that a $400 expense report could define her worth. That's the story of how they axed me over $400, and my response cost them $15 million. But more importantly, it's the story of how I turned the worst professional experience of my life into the foundation for something better than I ever could have built if they'd kept me. Sometimes the